The first lecture is by Krista Bonello Rutter Giappone from the University of Malta. Krista has been co-designing a historical game funded by the Arts Council of Malta entitled Valletta Streets of History. The game is not only a fascinating case of historical game, but perhaps most importantly, is one of the few games that deals with archival research, meaning that the game simulates not only history, but most importantly, the process of researching and of kind of archiving history and finding out what's happened in the past. So, being a co-designer of the game, Krista will tell us about the research process behind the game, and that's it, I guess. Of course, you will present yourself better than me.
Thank you, Stefano. Yep. Okay. Thank you. So yes, this is Valletta Streets of History, released actually in March earlier this year. Funded by the Arts Council Malta, and this is a location-based AR game. This is the whole team. So Aphrodita is the artist. I, Naomi, Renata, and Daniel were involved in the research and writing of the game, and Emanuela and Yanis were on the game development team, were the programming team. So we were basically, a lot of us are alumni or academics at the University of Malta. It was a collaborative effort between the Institute of Digital Games and the Department of English. So, there's an element of creative writing, research-led, always within the parameters of the research. And but our aim was never to be only academic. Our aim was to reach out to a wider public. So yes, sort of academic in source, but the aim went beyond that. So some of the team were involved in actually making a little pilot game before. This was not by any, to any degree accurate. This was actually made during lockdowns, so we had restrictions on how far we could go to the archives and visit, but we said we want to try this out, try the format out, see if it works, and it also gave us something to present to the funding body. So we said, look, this can be done. But this was a little pilot project before, done within a short time frame. And the current game, what we later developed, is more extensive, has more diversified gameplay elements, with mini games, with AR features, and of course it would have been impossible to develop without the funding. And I mentioned that not only to sort of give credit, of course, to the Arts Council Malta, but also in recognition that a lot of games that would be brilliant never get made because of a lack of funding and support. So this is something we are always aware of. We were lucky to receive the funding. But of course, institution support and funding support is so important, basically, for small projects such as this, some of which never take off, even though they've got so much potential. And that's unfortunate. The project aims included connecting historical archival research with detective games. This was, part of our plan for the narrative design too. Then we had bridging the educational and the recreational. We didn't want to make a game that was rigidly or exclusively educational. We wanted it to be fun. We wanted it to be engaging, which is why it also includes mini games. And focus on micro-histories. So micro-histories left out of traditional textbooks, not focusing on big events, basically, or on high-ranking people, but on the everyday experiences of ordinary persons. So big events may feature in the background, right? Big events such as the plague of 1813 in Malta is one of the settings of the story. But we focus on the journey of one person. We also really wanted to give a sense of the socio-economic contexts and the political contexts surrounding these microhistories and the associated power structures, because isolating these microhistories made no sense to us. I personally have a strong interest in the historian E.P. Thompson, who focused on socio-economic processes and collective histories. So we wanted our microhistories to be embedded in the wider context. In terms of gameplay, the player also assumes the role of a kind of detective historian, as we were, the ones doing the research. We were kind of working in this role. Uncovering archival entries, again entering the researcher's shoes. So as Stefano pointed out, we are also simulating the process of doing historical research. Visiting locations in Valletta and interacting with AR models. So we link this historical angle with tangible heritage, with buildings, some of which still exist, some of which don't, and this is where AR came in. And playing related mini-games. As I said, this is part of developing the recreational angle. One of the things I teach at the University of Malta, or I have taught for several years, is detective fiction. So this was important to me as in a sense, an aspect of the design and also an aspect of how the research is carried out. So scholars such as John Skaggs have pointed out that actually a historian works a lot like a detective. There is the sifting for clues, there is the looking at the evidence, there is interpreting the clues. And Roger Kaiwa, who of course wrote a lot about games, but also wrote an essay on the detective novel as game. And Kaiwa compares the investigator to the detective, who uses basically ingenuity to answer these questions. Who, when, where, how, why? And these are also questions that interested us when we were looking at the research for the game. But of course, our why is not a straightforward solution as it might be in terms of finding the motive in a detective story. Our why, we looked for this sometimes inconclusively, right? But we looked for this again in the context. We looked for this in the socioeconomic conditions that contributed to certain things happening. Kaiwa again and Todorov too, but remind us that detective fiction is structured again along the lines of sort of how much evidence is revealed and how evidence is revealed to the reader. And there has been actually a tradition in detective fiction of giving the evidence directly to the reader and letting the reader piece it together themselves. Kaiwa tells us at this point, when this happens, it is not a tale but a game. So sometimes, like in Cluedo, right, a game designed in 1943, in Cluedo and in these novels, the reader is given an envelope at the end with the solutions. So the reader is given the clues and then the solution. This is in the Dennis Wheatley and J.G. Link's novel, Murder of Miami. Documents of the case is a little different. You do get the solution at the end, but you get testimonies before. So rather than getting a detective, you get the testimonies, you get the evidence. It's interesting to note, actually, that there are certain archives which we did not draw upon for this game. Earlier archives, going back to the 16th, 17th century, where case files for crimes and police records actually contained pieces of hair, for example, actually contained physical evidence. These are not the sources we used and we looked at, but I'd really love to do something with this, actually. You know, the kind of physical evidence that would be collected and is actually there in the historical records, earlier than the period we looked at. But we do look, at least two of the stories deal with crime. So our game requires the player's presence on site, and encourages the player to directly access historical evidence. So the documentation is also there, is also available, photographs of the evidence that one can see. We still have, we haven't removed the detective figure. We haven't removed this mediating character. There's a player character, and the player takes the role of this historian. So we do keep some distance. We keep a mediation, we keep distance, and we hope that maybe this distance will open up for some space for reflection. Some space for reflection on what is different and what is in some ways similar today. And we take our course through the capital city. And the capital city, I mean, the choice of the city was not, obviously, I mean, the city is easier to walk around and have locations next to each other, so it's practical. But there's also a long association of the city with, say, detective, and this goes back to before noir, to before hard-boiled fiction, hard-boiled detective fiction. This is actually, you know, Dupin, Edgar Allan Poe. We sallied forth into the streets, arm in arm, continuing the topics of the day, or roaming far and wide until a late hour, seeking amid the wild lights and shadows of the populous city that infinity of mental excitement which quiet observation can afford. There is something about the city that lends itself to this kind of exploration, even in detective fiction. That's a Sherlock Holmes screenshot from Jack the Ripper. I've also included that because, well, Sherlock Holmes also has a connection to the city, but one of our original ideas was to make an adventure game, a small adventure game. We did something different, but it was there at the start. Again, G.K. Chesterton, the lights of the city begin to glow like innumerable goblin eyes, since they are the guardians of some secrets. So the city holding secret, the twists of the road, the fantastic skyline of chimney pots, signaling, almost like a cipher, signaling the meaning of the mystery. And this is from kind of memoirs, kind of exaggerated memoirs, but Vidocq, and the same about Paris, like with Dupin. A peine élargie, I'm sorry, my French is not great, but only just having been released, he reappeared in the capital, Paris. And this was the only stage where he could devote himself to his usual criminal activities with some success. So Vidocq reporting on the criminal activities in Paris. The city is also seen as a bit of a melting pot where crime can flourish. Valletta is by no means a metropolis, right? Valletta is by no means a metropolis. It's small, but for that period, it was one of the most populated areas in Malta. At the beginning of the 19th century, the population was growing, and 1/4 of the population of Malta was around the harbour. The population of Malta being around 90,000 at that time. So we are talking a smaller scale than, quite small scale Malta. Activities, the economics, we're focused on the harbour, we're focused on the sea. Commercial interests, we're more focused on the sea than, say, on agriculture. This is Valletta. This is a design of Valletta. You can see that it's a grid, so it's actually quite easy to navigate. It's it was built in the 1560s and 1570s under the Knights of Malta. And the Grand Master, La Valletta, laid the foundation stone of the city in 1566. We focus on the period that comes after the Knights. We focus on the British period, the so-called British period, when Malta was under colonial rule. And this Malta came under colonial rule in about 1800, first as a protectorate and then as a colony. But we start our journey at the library. So that's, the library was the start of the researcher's journey as well, and also the start of the player's journey. Because the focus on archival research was always key to us. So we took the National Library, we made it a centre, we made it the start. We wanted to underline that this was also a point of return for the researchers themselves. So the player is retracing our steps. And the library also has associations that were important to us. And I'm working on an article about the library, about libraries in games with Daniel Vella at the moment. So the library often promises some stability. The library promises continuation of customs and traditions and a repository. However, the library is often, even in games, threatened with precarity, threatened with loss, the spectre of loss. The library holds what is past. The library, if the library gets damaged, there is a loss of history. So the library has a certain weight, but also a certain precarity. Libraries also lend themselves to a kind of cultural identity around a community, because partly through the act of documentation, right? Documentation, solidifying, again, precariously, but seemingly with a lot of authority. And becoming, in a sense, a sign of a collective identity. Sorry. So, for example, I mean, also we've got games, we've got RPGs, video games that have books, use books in libraries in particular ways. For example, as repositories of lore, right? The history of the world of the game. Repositories of history. And also puzzles, secrets. The player is sometimes called upon to solve something. This is an association that the library often plays in adventure games. The concept of community, and the concept of, yes, vital places to record culture as well as facts. Also, the library is the place where strangers are accepted. This is something Laura Marcus, writing about the cultural meaning of the library, points out, that the library is community, but it's also accepting to strangers. And in a sense, we are all strangers to the past. I mean, I like to go to L.P. Hartley and the Go-Between, and like, the past is a foreign country. They do things differently there. So in our game, the library holds significance as an institution, but also as a source, as a portal to the stories, a hub for the stories. And the player is following the trail of evidence. I mean, this sort of in mist, it's rather literal, right? It's books, a deserted library, books as the portals to other worlds. So again, libraries and games have a long tradition in themselves. But we focused on primary sources. This is the library in Valletta. This is the National Library in Valletta. Actually, like, you can't even take photos inside. So this is an official photo that they gave me permission to use. But accessing primary sources is a historical practice. It's something historians do. And this also has tradition in Malta, in history education. In history education, an expert, Josan Vella, has actually written a lot about the source method, people going to the sources. And our work, following Sam Weinberg, following other historians, was to give the primary access to our players. We drew upon the National Archives in Mdina, those over there, Santo Spirito in Rabat. So these are not in Valletta, these are in other old cities, but we went to other archives. And Judge Giovanni Bonello he has an extensive private collection that he gave us access to. So we also had private collections. We consulted as well the diocesan archives, the church archives of the Archbishop's Curia, and the notarial archives, and also the Tayar Foundation for Jewish History in Malta. And I mean, basically historical game studies and history in education suggests that access to these sources helps educate people in history, helps initiate them into certain skills that a historian has. So not simply the content, not simply what the game is about, but also how to do history itself. And this, like Adam Chapman says, that games can offer structured access to types of historical practice. How much time do I have? Great. Okay, good. Because I'm going to, I'll say something small about each segment. We had different stories. And we, as I said, we made a conscious choice to focus on stories that were not foregrounded in the textbooks. Individual micro-histories, personalized, but also the political and the practical impact of policies and socioeconomic conditions on the people affected. And the people most affected were obviously the people who lacked power to say otherwise, to do otherwise. So this is, I mean, some scholars, such as James Billington, make a claim for humanization as primary exposure to primary documents humanize the story. This is something that certain scholars claim. For us, this was also a design choice, though. This was a way of streamlining our stories. So that's on a more practical level. And also leaving room for encounters with other stories in passing. And we had AR elements, the mini games. So we had the physical element, the walking through the city, but also the digital access to primary sources that the player would not be able to touch in a museum. With poverty and punishment, but this is a picture, this is a drawing by Aphrodite, our artist, of what was called the hubba. The hubba is a coin which represented in value 1/5 of the smallest coin in any other monetary system in Europe. So in Malta, there was the smallest coin that was made specifically for Malta. This is again, you know, these are the conditions under the British Empire in the 19th century. So as a colony, poverty was rampant, and of course, especially in the city. So there is a description and this depiction of the coin that comes up actually after a mini game. So we have a mini game which involves catching crumbs and coins. And no matter how many you manage to catch, your score is always going to be too low, is always going to be pitifully low. And this is the description that comes up. Basically, the idea that you cannot win your way out of poverty. So, you know, even if you catch 100 of these coins, I mean, the game's got a time limit, but these coins are so small that it's never going to amount to much. So we focused on the socioeconomic conditions in various ways. This is actually an example, a photo of one of the documents we looked at. And this story involved Isidoro Mifsud. This is the poverty and punishment story. And Isidoro Mifsud was accused of theft in 1867. He was 17, he was a baker's son, and he was brought to Valletta from Vittoriosa, today also called Borgo. He was brought from one of the other harbour towns. So his crime was theft from his employers. And he was employed as a domestic servant. And I found out about this case. We did some desk research as well. We looked at historians who were already writing in the area, besides the archive work. And I spoke to and read Evelyn Pulicino, who basically documented all the 19th century crime records in the archives. And I came across a quote from this case, which was actually in Italian, because a lot of the documents are in Italian. The court documents especially. Mio fratello, sorry, forgive my Italian. Mio fratello piangeva perché aveva fame. My brother was in tears because he was so hungry. And this cry of desperation seemed to ring out through the pages, and I wanted to hear more about this case and to read more about this case. So we went to the National Archives. I went to the National Archives. One of the challenges, I have to say, is actually getting used to the different handwriting, because each witness's deposition, each witness's testimony was in a different handwriting. Very difficult to if you're not a trained archivist, even if you are, but the handwriting can be a challenge. The police report found that there was enough material to charge Isidoro before the court, and 8 out of 9 of the jury found him guilty. So he was sentenced to 18 months of hard labor. This is a 17-year-old boy. We don't know what happened after this. So basically, in Poverty and Punishment, it's a play on the title Crime and Punishment, but we wanted to move beyond the dominant narrative, the narrative that so many people go to about poverty causing crime. We wanted to go beyond this to show how punishment and crime can also lead to poverty, and how law can create crimes like vagrancy, for example. So law would sometimes punish poverty. So we wanted to show this relationship. It's not simply, it's not poverty causing crime, but it's actually sometimes the law itself creating poverty and crime. We also looked again at locations that were off the beaten track. The Nix Mangiare steps are not quite a tourist location. They're near the docks. And these would be filled with beggars at the time. And Nix Mangiare was the cry that the beggars used to, the homeless, the people begging, they would say, Nix Mangiare, I have nothing to eat. This is our artist's rendition of the stairs. It's basically, I mean, this was near the harbour area, so people coming in would be of all nationalities, and the people flocking on the stairs would hear so many different languages and piece things together to try to communicate to all the people disembarking, all the people getting off the ships. So German, Italian, English, nix mangiare, nothing to eat. So these are off the tourist trail, right? So this is almost, I mean, almost a psychogeography approach, because we try to change the map, the places that a tourist would go to. We try to send them to other places. We try to send them to places that would have been busy or important in another period. Places that would have had different rhythms in another period. And streets that perhaps would not be quite the same today. So the periphery, I should say Valletta today is very gentrified, like enormously gentrified. So the locations that they go to, we will ask them to see it differently, but we will also try to go to other locations that are not so central as well. We had central locations too. So this is the text, actually, the text that the player would see. There was a yawning chasm between the rich and the poor. We included some quotations from our sources, sometimes from the primary sources, also from the secondary sources, just to make sure we credited everyone. And we basically let the player have access to that trail. The city gate, the story takes the player to the city gate. The city gate was redesigned and rebuilt several times over history. These photos are of the way it would have looked at the time in the 19th century, late 19th century, the period for the story. So the city gate was one of the sites that had an AR feature. I have to admit, I'm not really qualified to speak about the AR features because I was not, I'm not on the programming team, and I don't, but I want to give a glimpse into it nonetheless. It passed from the artist to the programmers. And to go back to the documents, at the city gate, we actually linked it to another story involving a petition written by a mother for the release of her son from prison. And her son was in prison for homicide. The son had been, again, very young, 16, and he was imprisoned, sentence of imprisonment for 20 years with hard labor. The letter of petition offers an excuse for her son. So the letter says that the son, I quote, did not act by the influence of premeditated malice, but was carried away by a sudden passion. So the letters show an awareness of legal language as well, right? Which is surprising, but very often these letters of petition would be written with the help of notaries and clerks. So even these things, even these aspects of the sources, that's of interest too. Your petitioner, having lately had the misfortune of losing her husband, was thrown into the greatest state of poverty. And this is someone from Gozo who basically had to send a petition to the Chief Secretary of Government. The Chief Secretary of the Governor disagreed. So verso behind, there is a note from the Chief Secretary of Government saying that the case of this man has been repeatedly considered. There is no additional reason stated here that might, in my opinion, justify a pardon for the present. Indicating that the woman had not, it was not the first time she had petitioned. So basically, we include photographs of these documents and also where we found them. The plague victim was another one, and this focused on the plague in Malta, but with a focus on a microhistory, with a focus on Antonio Borch, who was executed, was one of 2 people, I believe, executed for breaking quarantine. And this is the ship, this is a rendition of the ship that brought the plague, allegedly brought the plague to Malta in AR. The document, the files, and the Antonio Borch case files. And this is interesting too. We include this. We include photos. These are from the private collection of Giovanni Bonello, which show methods of disinfecting letters, disinfecting communications during the plague. Obviously, not scientifically based, and many of them would have no effect, but you've got them treated with chemicals over there. Sulfur, sometimes various chemicals. There you've got slitting, because they believe that if you slitted the envelope, then that would let out the germs. That's the heat tongue. They were heated. You can see the image, the shape of the tongue. And these are the seals of disinfection to show that they had been disinfected. So again, we looked, these are examples of the physical evidence that we included in digital form, as photographs in this case. We referred to the Giornale di Malta. This was in the National Library a lot, because this gave us a glimpse into the everyday progression of the plague, because it listed the names of the people who had died in the plague every day. We also had a story about one of the first woman, basically, to get a degree in pharmacy in Malta, who was also from a Jewish family, and we get an insight into certain aspects of the context. I'm aware I'm coming to the end, so we also included the way we framed it. Even artistically, was by using this kind of journal format. So the artist would also lend a personal touch to it by making it partly refer to the experiences and the memories of this detective historian player character. So there is the aspect of like taking notes, like in a journal, and collecting photos. And this is a Catholic procession in Malta. There is also the idea that, as you can see, there are 2 things going on here. There's a bit of a tension, perhaps, between the documentary evidence and the artistic style, which is more impressionistic. And this was deliberate, because the impressionistic style lends it an aspect of, well, this more kind of this memory. As we are going, as the players going through it, as the researchers going through it, we are creating our own memories. Reference to traditions like this still happens in the Maltese streets, sort of. So this is also an aspect of intangible heritage, cultural heritage, continuity. So memory kind of melts into the documentary approach in a way that is not quite in conflict. I mean, there is a tension rather than a conflict. But yes, maybe I could wind up there. I'll just say that this is available on Google Play, Apple Store. I mean, obviously, it's AR and it requires walking around the city, but you can like use fake GPS to do that. But thank you so much to the organizers. Oh, there are cats. There are cats in the game too. And Malta loves its cats. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you all for listening.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much for your lecture. It's pretty interesting, especially how you merge the detective game or detective narrative with the historical practice of researching. And of course, it's evident that as academics, you have been reflecting on many things, over-reflecting on aesthetics, mechanics, and stuff like that. Okay, is there any question?
Hi, Krista. You know what's coming. So, I have actually played the game, only one of the 3 narratives, Poverty and Punishment. And the narrative aspect, the story, I loved it. I was with a friend, another student at the University of Malta, so while not being Maltese, we have been in Valletta before. And we struggled a bit in finding some of the places. And so I was wondering, who is your target audience? If it's specifically or designed mostly for Maltese people uncovering history, for schools, for tourists, because this for me was a bit, I was questioning it.
Thank you. I think we wanted to, I mean, we did want to be as open as possible. I mean, maybe because of that, we were less specifically tailored to a particular group. So, you know, with the educational element, it's not for very young kids, for example. So, I mean, we're aware that some of the locations might be more difficult to guess at, so we included the hint system. So
yeah, for us it was really the navigation itself, because Valletta is not an easy city to actually navigate. Sometimes places are hidden, and for example, we didn't get to the stairs. We arrived close enough for the story to actually oh yes, this is a good location. And we looked at each other and we were like, okay, this is good enough for now. We've been working enough as it is. But yeah, no, it was really fun as an experience. And the hints actually helped.
I'm glad to hear that. And yes, I mean, some people won't need a hint. Some people will need, because we have two hints and the solution. We give the solution if people still can't get it. So yes, we are aware that we tried to moderate that difficulty by using the hint system, but it's something, you know, we'll take on board too. We're like, okay, maybe we need to be, maybe certain things could have been more explicit. Or I mean, there is a map too. There is a map.
But I think the biggest problem was not the design of the game, but Valletta itself. I mean, for us, the obstacle was Valletta itself. And on that note,
sorry, I'll go to the. Sorry.
To the map.
The map, yes, the map, not from the game. This is a historical map from 1918. But yes, sorry, to show Valletta itself.
I mean, it's not just for the game, but I had many experiences of trying to find a specific place, and how do I get there? Oh, there's a wall here. I shouldn't have come this way. Anyway, I also wondered if you, Maltese people playing the game, what was their experience, because we didn't even try to play without the hints.
Okay.
We were like, no, this is not for us. We don't know the city that well. And I was wondering if you actually had testers who played it without the hints and managed to guess the places and play the detective part.
I mean, our team was quite mixed. So, you know, that's quite a mixed team. So some of us are Maltese, some of us are mainly Greek, actually. So all had the experience. I'm not sure. I mean, I think it's I think maybe. I mean, that the hints could have. I mean, you know, the hints where we expected that some people would need the hints, but we also wanted to keep in. This is the thing. We also wanted to keep in a bit of challenge.
Yeah, of course. Otherwise, Maltese people would be like, okay, yes, I have to go there. It's boring. It's because, of course, navigation is different for someone who is familiar with the city and someone who's still a foreigner. So
Yes.
that's.
I mean, do you have? Can you think of like? I mean, was it all the hints that you actually found quite
I think
difficult?
I don't. I think that we were like, yes, not all of them, but for sure, maybe not knowing that there is a place where I have to go makes it complicated. But the fact that we had the possibility to have the location marked on the map, it made it possible for us who were not, who didn't possess enough knowledge about the topology of the city and about the places to actually say, this is where I have to go. But this is part of.
I mean, it's part of
being not enough knowledgeable about the place. This is why I wanted to ask you if you had maybe in mind an educational purpose, because the felt designed. I mean, I would have loved to be a Maltese teenager and play the game without the hints.
Okay. I mean, to be honest, I would say that actually some of the clues were designed to make Maltese players think about the city a little bit differently too. So even the fact that we kind of tried to deviate from the main spots, that helped the Maltese, I mean, you know, was designed for the to snap the Maltese person out of habit. And to see the city a bit differently in terms of, for example, in terms of its history, in terms of the way it is constructed, and you know, like one clue from another story. One clue was there is a street in Valletta where there are a lot of jewelers, for example. There's a sort of famous street, but you can find out about that if you Google or if you ask someone, or if you know. So it's not impossible. It's like some Maltese teenagers would also, I think, struggle with some of the things. But hopefully it's about, it makes us see the space differently and better, because we have to navigate it in a different way. Because Maltese people are just so used to Valletta, they just don't even think of their surroundings. Sometimes they go in you know, to the streets they know very well, like any city, I guess. When you're commuting, when you're walking, not just Valletta, you get used to the same streets and you stop seeing them. So yes, I hope the Maltese players also had a bit of a challenge.
Thank you so much. And
Thank you.
again, we almost cried while playing Poverty and Punishment. So that was a success, in my opinion.
Okay,
Thank
is
you.
there other questions here or there? Any hands up? I have one actually, which is about the present within the game. I mean, it's actually hard, if not impossible, to make a historical and even a historiographical game without claiming, although implicitly, something about the present. Was among your aims, there was claiming something about any kind of present political, socio-economic, or whatever, or the game is totally detached, in a sense, from our time?
No, all of the stories had a link to the present. I mean, to stick with poverty and punishment for the moment, because I think there's also a there is also a screenshot. Let me find it. We make reference to, not exactly in these screenshots, but we make reference to how gentrified Valletta is. And we make reference to the gap between the rich and the poor. And we do invite the player to consider how different the present is. Because, Valletta is so gentrified that it's, poorer people have actually had to move out of the city from their homes. So yes, we very much wanted to prompt the player to reflect on these things.
I was thinking about this during the blog part of the presentation.
Yes, as well.
Is there any reference with the
there is
COVID emergency and pandemic?
Yes, we couldn't
Yeah.
escape it because we were doing the research, when it was still very fresh and very much hauntings. And I think it must have, also been not fully consciously, but must have been one of the reasons we chose that theme, because it was now on our minds. So yes.
Other questions or no? So I guess we can move forward. Okay, thank you again, Krista, for your presentation.
Thank you. Thank you.